Why do people with half your intelligence keep outplaying you? Let that hit you. You read more, you think more, you prepare more, and still, they win. Then someone walks into the room and outmaneuvers you completely. That's not bad luck. That's a blind spot. Most people never see it. It's the most expensive one you have. And this is where most people get it wrong. Not everyone who smiles at you is on your side. Some people are simply watching. Watching for when you relax. Watching for when you trust too easily. Watching for the moment you reveal exactly what you need and exactly how to withhold it. And this is where it gets dangerous. You won't see it coming. Not because you aren't smart, but because you've been told that intelligence is about what you know. Machiavelli disagreed. He watched brilliant men fall, educated men, powerful men, men who had read every text and studied every theory. They fell not because they lacked knowledge. They fell because they lacked awareness. Awareness of people, awareness of timing, awareness of themselves. And there is a difference, a real, consequential difference, between being intelligent and being dangerously smart. Intelligence is what you know. Dangerous intelligence is how you move. Most people never learn that distinction, and it costs them everything. They spend years collecting information and almost no time understanding human nature. They read the books, they pass the tests, they absorb the frameworks, and then they walk into a room and get outmaneuvered by someone with half their education. Why? Because that person understood something the books don't teach. Today we are going to break down 7 lessons, drawn from Machiavelli's thinking, sharpened by psychology, that will change how you read every interaction you've ever had. Not just with other people, with yourself. These aren't manipulation tactics. They are principles of clarity, of awareness, of becoming genuinely harder to deceive and harder to read. But here is what I'll tell you now. Some of these will be uncomfortable. Some of them will force you to look at patterns you've been quietly ignoring. And there is one lesson at the end, the 7th, that most people never reach. It is the one that makes the other 6 actually work. Stay until the end. This is where it begins. Lesson 1. Control what you reveal. Every time you over-explain yourself, you hand someone a map to your mind. Every time you justify a decision nobody asked about, you're showing them exactly where your insecurity lives. Every time you share your plans before they are finished, you're giving people the blueprint for how to interfere. Let that sink in. Machiavelli was precise about this. He observed that a prince who broadcasts his intentions is not a strategist. He is a target. Predictability is the first form of weakness, and it will cost you rooms you deserve to hold. The sociologist Erving Goffman called this impression management, the idea that social life is a performance, and the people who control their self-presentation control how they are perceived. Machiavelli saw the same dynamic 4 centuries earlier without the academic language. He watched rulers who talked too much lose courts they had earned. He watched quiet men rise to positions that should have been beyond their reach. The difference wasn't intelligence. It wasn't resources. It was restraint. You've been in this situation before. Someone pressed you. You felt the discomfort of being misunderstood. So you explained. You justified. You added detail. You wanted to be seen clearly. And what happened after? They used that information. Not always with bad intent. Sometimes simply to define you in their own mind. And once you're defined, you're contained. You become a known quantity. Easy to predict. Easy to manage. Easy to dismiss. Machiavelli's lesson here is not about being dishonest. It is about being selective. There is a real difference between transparency and overexposure. Transparency with people who have genuinely earned it is a form of depth. Overexposure to everyone who asks is a form of vulnerability dressed as openness. Here's what most people miss. That silence you keep filling? It is working for you. Every answer you withhold keeps you slightly out of reach. Every unnecessary explanation you swallow preserves your edge. Out of reach is where your leverage lives. Let that silence work. Lesson 2. Silence is not emptiness. It is pressure. Most people are genuinely afraid of silence. There is a psychological concept called intolerance of uncertainty, the mind's compulsive drive to resolve open loops, fill gaps, land on conclusions. When you go quiet, other people's minds rush in to fill the space you've left. They start explaining you to themselves, They project, they guess, they negotiate with your absence. And what they fill that silence with reveals far more about them than anything they would voluntarily say out loud. Machiavelli understood this mechanism without labeling it. A ruler who speaks constantly signals anxiety. A ruler who speaks deliberately signals authority. The room leans toward the person who doesn't need the room's validation. Think about the most composed person you've ever encountered. The one who made you feel slightly off balance without doing anything overtly aggressive. Were they loud? Were they performing? Or were they simply still? Stillness is not passive. It is pressure applied without movement. Read that again. The Stoics were precise about this principle. Epictetus wrote that you have power over your response, not over what happens around you. Public silence is the most visible expression of that power. The refusal to be pulled, the refusal to perform, the refusal to react on someone else's emotional timeline. There is also a neurological dimension here. When you respond immediately to provocation, you signal that your nervous system is being run by the external environment. When you pause deliberately, you signal the opposite. You signal that you are the variable, not the situation. That is a different kind of presence. People feel it before they can name it. Your silence becomes a question they cannot answer. So they keep talking. They over-explain. They try to get a reading on you. And while they're doing that, you are watching. You are collecting. You are learning exactly what they would have hidden if you had simply filled the quiet for them. Now it goes deeper. Lesson 3. Read the person, not the situation. Machiavelli was not primarily interested in events. He was interested in the people behind them. He wrote about human nature with the precision of someone who had watched it destroy capable rulers again and again. What he kept seeing was the same pattern. Events are just the surface. Underneath every event is a person with ego, with fear, with desire, with wounds they haven't examined. If you understand the person, you can often read the event before it happens. That's the edge. This is what he meant when he wrote that the wise man observes men more than laws. Laws change. Human nature does not. Not in any way that matters strategically. Carl Jung described a related mechanism. He called it the shadow, the parts of the self that people suppress because the world told them those parts were unacceptable. The ambition they were told was arrogance. The anger they were told was weakness. The need they were told was shameful. Those parts don't disappear, they go underground. And then they run behavior from below the surface. And this is where it gets dangerous. When someone dismisses your idea too quickly in a meeting, that may not be a professional assessment. That may be the shadow speaking, the part of them that feels threatened. When someone is consistently generous in a way that feels slightly off, watch carefully for what they expect in return. Generosity with quiet strings attached isn't generosity. It's a transaction wearing a generous costume. You felt this before. Someone did something kind for you, and something in your gut said, "This is going to cost me something." That instinct is worth trusting. Machiavelli built his political philosophy on the belief that clear-eyed observation of human nature, without flinching, without moralizing, is the beginning of real intelligence. Not intelligence about systems, not intelligence about information, intelligence about people, which is the only kind that changes outcomes. Because what comes next is the lesson people most instinctively push back on. It challenges something deeply social in how most people were raised. The idea that showing your full strength is how you earn respect. Machiavelli would call that a costly misunderstanding. This is where it goes wrong. Lesson 4. Never reveal your full capacity. There is a concept in game theory called strategic ambiguity. It is the deliberate practice of keeping others uncertain about your actual strength, your actual resources, your actual next move. Nations use it in negotiation. Companies use it before product launches. And the people who move through complex social environments with unusual grace use it constantly, usually without ever naming it. Machiavelli framed it as the lion and the fox. The lion has raw force. The fox has cunning. A prince who is only a lion will eventually be trapped by someone with a fox's patience. A prince who is only a fox will eventually be ignored by those who respect only visible power. The skill, the actual skill, is controlling which aspect you reveal and precisely when. Here's what most people get wrong. They operate at one extreme or the other. Either they display everything they have, performing their value, signaling that they matter, trying to be fully seen, or they hide completely, shrinking in rooms, performing endless humility, afraid to threaten anyone. Neither works reliably. Showing everything makes you readable. Hiding everything makes you irrelevant. The strategic version reveals just enough to command genuine attention and holds back just enough to remain slightly unsettling. Tesla worked in near total isolation for extended periods before presenting anything publicly. Newton held his most consequential discoveries private for years. Not out of insecurity, out of something more calculated. They understood that premature revelation is a form of spending. You spend the weight of surprise. You spend the advantage of being underestimated. Once spent, you cannot recover it. What you haven't shown yet is often your greatest asset in any dynamic. And the moment someone believes they have fully understood you, your leverage in that relationship begins to shrink. Stay slightly beyond reach. Not coldly, strategically. There is a real difference between those two things. Lesson 5. Understand what people actually want, not what they say they want. People rarely tell you the truth about what drives them. And here's the thing. Not because they're deliberately deceptive, but because they genuinely don't know. Machiavelli observed that men are fundamentally governed by two forces above all others, the need for security and the hunger for significance. Everything else, the ambition, the alliances, the social performances, the rivalries, most of it traces back to one of those two roots. But here's what makes people genuinely hard to read. They've been conditioned to believe that some desires are acceptable and others aren't. So they dress the unacceptable ones in acceptable language. The person who says they want to help you might actually need to feel superior to you. The person who speaks loudly about fairness might want control more than justice. The person who says they don't care might be the one most defined by what they've lost. Pay attention to that pattern. This is not a cynical framework you apply to every interaction. Machiavelli called this capacity virtù, and he didn't mean moral virtue. He meant the unsentimental ability to see things as they are, to stop confusing what people say with what they consistently do. Behavior is the real text. Everything else is packaging. Watch what someone does when it costs them something personally. Watch how they behave when there is no audience. Watch how they treat people who offer them nothing. That is where the actual person lives. And once you learn to read at that level, not obsessively, not with suspicion, but with calm and clarity, social situations become far less disorienting. You stop being surprised by contradictions. You stop being confused by reversals. You begin to see the pattern before the event confirms it, and that changes everything. Lesson 6. Patience is not passive. It is the most precise strategy available to you. Most people confuse patience with waiting without purpose. Machiavelli saw it exactly the other way. He watched capable rulers destroy themselves not because they lacked strength, but because they moved at the wrong moment. They reacted when they should have observed longer. They spoke when silence would have been more devastating. They committed when the ground beneath them was still unstable. Timing governs everything in human affairs. And real timing requires patience. Not the passive kind, not the resigned kind, but the kind that watches carefully, calculates quietly, and refuses to be rushed by ego or anxiety. Think about how a skilled chess player actually operates. The beginner sees a threat and reacts immediately. The experienced player sees the same threat and asks a different question entirely. What is my opponent trying to force me to do? What opening does this move reveal? And then the experienced player does the opposite of panic. They slow down. They let the board develop further. They let the other person commit before they do. In social and professional dynamics, this plays out repeatedly. Someone provokes you. Someone challenges you publicly. Someone tests whether you'll react. And the instinctive response, the one that fear and ego both demand, is to respond immediately. To defend yourself, to match the energy, to demonstrate that you won't absorb this quietly. But here's what no one tells you. That immediate response is precisely what the provocation was designed to produce. Your reaction is their win. Your stillness is your answer. Machiavelli built significant sections of his work around this principle. That the leader who governs their responses governs the dynamic. The leader who cannot govern their responses will eventually be governed by whoever can. Patience isn't weakness wearing a patient face. It is force held in reserve until the moment it counts. Very few people ever reach this point. Lesson 7. Build your intelligence from the inside out. This is the lesson most people skip entirely. They want the strategies, they want the tools, They want the outcomes without examining the foundation those outcomes require. But Machiavelli was not simply a tactician. He was, at his core, a deeply serious student of the self. And he understood something that modern psychology would eventually confirm. The most dangerous person in any room is not the most aggressive or the most dominant. It is the person who knows themselves completely, who has looked honestly at their own fears, their own patterns, their own blind spots, and has not flinched from what they found. Jung called this individuation, the process of confronting and integrating the parts of yourself you have spent years running from. Most people never do this work. They project instead. They see their own fear in others and attack it there. They see their own ambition in others and resent it there. They spend extraordinary energy protecting a self-image that was built primarily to impress people they don't actually respect. You know this pattern. You've lived some version of it. Here is what Machiavelli understood about self-knowledge that goes beyond philosophy into practical territory. It is a strategic advantage. When you know your triggers, no one can reliably use them against you. When you understand your patterns, you stop running them automatically. When you are genuinely honest with yourself about your real motivations, not the ones you present to others, but the actual ones underneath, you stop being confused by your own behavior. You become coherent. And coherence is genuinely rare. Most people are a collection of unexamined reactions held together by a consistent surface. And this is where it gets dangerous. When you do the real work of self-knowledge, something concrete shifts. You stop reacting from the old wound. You start responding from stable ground. That difference between a reaction and a response is where all 7 of these lessons live. The 7 lessons build on each other. Self-knowledge creates awareness. Awareness creates silence. Silence creates space. Space creates timing. Timing creates precision. And precision, in what you reveal, in how you respond, in what you see in others and what you refuse to perform for them, is what Machiavelli actually meant by dangerous intelligence. Not cruelty, not manipulation, clarity. The kind that doesn't flinch. What you carry after this should not be suspicion of everyone around you. It should be a quieter, firmer sense of where you stand. And here is what no one tells you about the cost of this kind of clarity. Once you begin seeing these patterns clearly, you can't stop seeing them. Conversations change. Silences change. The texture of a room changes. You start to feel a slight distance from noise that used to feel normal. That's not arrogance. That's not coldness. That's the price of seeing clearly. Most people never pay it. They prefer the comfort of the surface. They prefer not knowing. But you're still here. So here's what comes next. You've just learned to read strategy, silence, and the forces running human behavior beneath the surface. But there is a layer beneath all of this that almost no one examines honestly. It isn't about reading others. It's about the signals you send without knowing it. The ones that reveal exactly who you are. Not in strategy, not in language, but in emotion. In the unguarded moment. In the reaction you didn't choose. The people who understand that layer move very differently from everyone else. Watch the next video. Because what it reveals about emotion, vulnerability, and the psychology of people who feel deeply might be the most unexpected thing you see this week. If something in this clicked for you, something you felt but never had the words for, let me know in the comments. And if you want to keep going deeper into this, make sure you're subscribed.